All right, and we are live with this week's book discussion. I'm thrilled to bring you the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and discuss some of the highlights that I pulled from it on this particular reading. Now, this actually highlights one of the most important things of these weekly book discussions that I'm having. I have read most of these books before, and you likely have as well. But we bring new experiences to it when we come back to it years later. This is a perfect example of it. Everybody's read it. It's sold 20 million copies or something like that. It's been in print for 25 years. So most everybody is familiar with the concepts. But most of us, if you're like me, read it for the first time 15, 20 years ago. And what you bring to it now is completely different. You're at a completely different point in your career. There are a ton of highlights here. Probably half the examples that Stephen Covey gives in this book are in regards to parenting. Well, when I first read this book, kids were years away from my life. And so coming back to it later, you're able to pull some things into your personal life as well. So great books, as I put in the kind of the description of this video, great books are worth coming back to over and over again. So if you have a particular book that you like, that you read 3 years ago, 5 years ago, it's worth picking it up and rereading it because you're going to pull something new from it and you're going to find some new application or some reinforcement to what you already knew. So, Crystal, so good to see you here. Toki, good to see you here as well. Anybody who's got any comments, any questions, as I kind of go through this summary and pull out some of these highlights, by all means, drop them into the comment section. I'll kind of take them when I get to a stopping point here. But there are, as you would imagine with a book like this, there are a ton of things that I want to get to. And how I work through these book discussions, if you haven't tuned into one of these before, is I go through the book and I just highlight certain things that jump out at me or that have a certain applicability to frontline leaders and how you might deal with leadership issues on a day in, day out basis. So I just literally start at the beginning and go through and pick up some of my highlights. Now there might be some broader points that I miss, and by all means call those out in the comment section and we can kind of go through those as well. But with that being said, there's a ton to get to in this, so I want to just kind of dive right in with some of the first thoughts on this. And one of the big things, I want to say paradigm shifts because I've been reading the book all week, so he talks a lot about paradigms, is the difference between the personality ethic and the character ethic. And what Stephen Covey gets at with this book, and I think most people take this away, is it's a deep foundational sort of principle-led way of handling things. And that's what he calls out right off at the beginning here, is that there is a lot of, for lack of better terms, get rich quick as far as your personality and as far as your success is concerned. And in rare instances, those work. Or in certain situations, those work. But by and large, what's going to get you through is a deeper, character-based way of dealing with people, dealing with yourself, and dealing with your challenges. And so he actually calls out, and I'll just read from the book here, but shortly after World War I, the basic view of success shifted from the character ethic to what might be called the personality ethic. Success became more a function of personality, of public image, of attitudes. Does this sound like it resonates in the social media world today? And behaviors, skills, and techniques that lubricate the process of human interaction. It wasn't your character that was determining how you interacted with other people. It was your outside image that determined how you interact with other people. And we certainly see that today as far as technology and social media, that sort of thing. We saw within him later, but that personality ethic, that's a secondary trait, not a primary trait. And so what he gets at, and I love this particular comment, is in reaping for so long where we have not sown. So you haven't put any effort into some of these things. It's very easy, especially the younger generation with Instagram, Facebook, to present yourself in a certain way with you fake it until you make it sort of philosophy. That's a very personality ethic sort of way of handling things. We've reaped for so long where we have not sown. Perhaps we have forgotten the need to sow at all. And so this book was written originally in 1989. And I think based on, that foundation for this book, it's more applicable today than it even was back in the late 80s because we have so much technology that it makes it easy for us to put on those airs, to have the aura of a certain skill set or a certain background. And so it's important that we check ourselves every once in a while and we get back in touch with our underlying character, our underlying principles, and those things that drive us. So he talks about as well in this that you're going to have to put forth effort. If you want to see improvement, you're going to have to put forth effort, and it's going to take a while. Part of the reason that, say, the personality ethic, as he describes it, is so attractive, part of the reason that it's so attractive to put up great posts of, a fine dining meal that you have on Facebook and make people think that that's what you do every other weekend, is because it's easy. And it's not easy to get those underlying principles in place, to build that character, to build that track record, that trust with your team, shall we say. And so it's important. He highlights something that I really liked, and that is, did you ever consider how ridiculous it would be to try to cram, like you cram for a test, cram on a farm? No, you have to plant those seeds. The farm is a natural system. The price must be paid and the process followed. You always reap what you sow. There is no shortcut. And I like that. I really like that. And this is one of those things that I took away from this book this time that I hadn't really acknowledged before. And that is, when we talk about sowing and reaping, it is a long-term sort of plan. When we're talking about these big foundational things, trust, your character, what motivates you on a deep, deep level, those big things that help you in your career and in your family life, in your personal life, those things take time. The seeds that you sow now, you will not reap until months, maybe years down the road. Neil, so glad you joined us today. And so I just really like that process of farming. We reap what we sow. We hear that all the time. But if you're like me, you want to reap and sow right on top of one another, and that's not the way that it works. What we are, in the last analysis, what we are communicates far more eloquently than what we say or do. And he hits this a couple of times, and it jumped out to me because one of those common sayings is that you aren't what you say you are what you do. All right? Actions speak louder than words. Absolutely, that's the case. But where those actions come up is those actions get sprouted from who we are, what our character is. And so working on that actually is the first step. It isn't actually just doing what you say you're going to do and doing the right thing. It is doing it from a place that fosters that sort of thing. Skills and personality might get you there, but character keeps you there. And that's a great way of putting it, Crystal. I couldn't have said it better myself because I didn't say it as well as you did right there. But that's absolutely it. Character is what keeps you there because that provides the wellspring for more good actions. You might get the actions right. And we see this with bad bosses that we might have. Hey, they get one or two things right every once in a while. Hey, a broken watch is right twice a day, as they say. But if you have the right character, if you have the right motivations, then that's the sort of thing that breeds the right actions, and you constantly are bringing those forward to people. So you'll notice I'm going to move fast through this because there's a whole bunch of highlights. I'm going to try to keep these book discussions down to about an hour. So I'm going to keep moving quickly through here. Many people experience a similar fundamental shift, and he's still talking, this is foundational stuff, talking about working from the inside out, working from that character into your actions and what you say. Many people experience a similar fundamental shift in thinking when they face a life-threatening crisis and suddenly see their priorities in a different light, or when they suddenly step into a new role. Now, I highlighted this, for its face value. Of course, your priorities change depending on, when you have those life-changing situations or when you have a crisis that's going on. The practical application for leaders out there that are working on the front lines is your priorities will shift for a lot of things. And you may be working on something that you would drop in a second if you had a meeting that popped up with a boss, with a peer, whatever it is. Those are those opportunities where that is not as high of a priority, or that's something where you would look to delegate that particular thing. And so there's oftentimes things that happen in life or in our day-to-day work that cause us to reassess our priorities. And it's a good exercise to kind of go through that occasionally when you find yourself getting stressed out, when you find yourself being overloaded. Apply one of those things. Well, what would happen right now with this project that I have to have due today if a customer called and needed me to travel to their place? Let's say you're in the same city. Travel to their workplace right now, and so I'd lose this entire afternoon. Would I work on it overnight, or would I have somebody do something for me? Well, if I would have somebody do something for me, then I can go ahead and apply that right now and take some of the burden off. So it just something that popped out to me as far as an application in managing your day and managing your priorities, that you can assess those life-changing situations to your current workday to reassess your priorities and reassess what you can delegate, really. Still talking foundational stuff here. We know and accept this factor principle of process. We accept process. We usually want quick fixes. We want this. But we accept the principle of process in the area of physical things. So he's talking about, say, exercise. So we accept that, you know what, if I went to the gym and I wanted to be able to bench press 300 pounds, I'm sure, given my frame, that I could. Not particularly strong, but I'm sure I could. But it would be a process to get me there. If you want to have deep, wonderful character that's rooted in the right things, that's going to be a process too. And we don't accept that. We don't accept it with poor employees. We want them to turn around like that. We don't accept that it's going to be a process to turn them around. We don't accept that it's going to be a process to make some of the needed changes that we have in the culture of our organizations. It is a process. It doesn't mean that you can't find ways to refine the process so it goes quicker, but don't look for those quick hits as far as those things that are most important. Those things that are trivial are almost always things that can be flipped around like this. The part of what gives things something value and part of what imparts meaning to it is the process that it takes to get to something. And so realize that everything that is worthwhile is usually going to be a process. Accept it and look to move through the process as quickly as you can. So kind of overviewing the 7 habits on here. Sow a thought, and we've heard this before, but it gets to what he's kind of talking about in this book. Sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, and reap a destiny. And so the 7 habits of highly effective people, I don't think, I'm sure there was lots of thought given to it, but part of it is because habits happen to be right in the middle of this. Habits are where the flywheel effect starts taking place as far as your behaviors. And if you sow the right actions and reap the right habits, you're going to reap the benefits of those habits down the road. And so this is where he's talking about, this is what he's after, is looking to take from thought to action to habit to character to destiny. So that's it. So we'll start with thoughts. He'll start there, and then we'll move into actions. Skipping over that one. One of the immensely valuable aspects of any correct principle, and I pulled this one because I liked it, any correct principle is that it is valid and applicable in a wide variety of circumstances. So I'm going to say this again, one of the immensely valuable aspects of any correct principle is that it is valid and applicable in a wide variety of circumstances. You may hear me talk a lot about how dealing with your employees is similar to dealing with your children. And that's not, of course, any sort of hit on your employees. It's because some of the principles that you might talk about have a wide variety of applications. That's why the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People isn't just a business book. It is also a personal life book, because those deep principles that he's talking about work in a variety of different circumstances. So they'll work in your professional life. They'll work in your personal life. They'll work with relationships with friends, with family, all of those things. So just one of those things that I kind of called out was that valuable aspects of correct principles, one of the ways to identify a correct principle is probably its applicability into various circumstances. So just a little takeaway for you there. I really like this one. The PC principle is to always treat your employees exactly how you want them to treat your best customers. Now, you may have heard this in different ways, but I just like the way that he phrased it there. The PC principle, which is the PC is the production capacity. So there's always a balance. And so you can either produce or you can work on your production capacity, how much you can produce at any one given time. And the example he uses prior in the book is the old fable of the goose that laid the golden egg. And so production was one, egg a day. There wasn't a way of increasing the production capacity, but what the farmer really cared about was the production, so he didn't pay any attention to the production capacity. You might see this as far as maintenance, downtime for equipment. The production capacity, you need that maintenance, but that maintenance takes away from your production. So if you don't care about this, you will wear down the equipment to get that production. And so you need to find that balance. So one of the big things as far as production capacity is concerned from your business is to always treat your employees exactly as you want them to treat your best customers. And I think that was the one word that was different in how I've taken that before, and that is your best customers. How would you treat your best customers? Treat your employees that same way, and they'll be more apt to reflect that to others. I already talked about the balance between the P and PC principles that he's talking about there. All right, so getting into the 7 habits themselves. And so the 7 habits, if you haven't seen this before, what it does is a few different models, and you can look this up online and see the 7 habits in the wheel that he talks about. But it's a couple of different things. It's moving from dependence, childlike, shall we say, to independence, adulthood, to interdependence, and that is being able to work with other individuals. So first, we're always dependent. You know, you might see that in your job, you see that in your home life. Then you move up to independence, where you're able to do things on your own, handle your initial responsibilities, and then you move to interdependence. And that is really, the crux of that is making everybody else around you better. Serving them, making them better, as well as yourself, and finding those synergies. And the 7 habits, to call them out, 1 is being proactive, and that's what we'll talk about next here. 2, begin with the end in mind. 3, put first things first, prioritizing. 4 is thinking win-win. That's moving now into interdependence. 5 is seek first to be understood, or first to understand, then to be understood. 6 is to synergize, and then 7 is sharpening the saw, and that's making sure that you are refreshing and rejuvenating yourself so that you can bring your best to the next time you move through the 7 habits. I like this, the social mirror he talks about as far as being proactive. If the only vision you have, if the only vision we have of ourselves comes from the social mirror, from the current social paradigm, and from the opinions, perceptions, and paradigms of the people around us, again, I'm calling it social media here, our view of ourselves is likely the reflection in the crazy mirror room at the carnival. And that is, we often see ourselves as other people see us. I'm doing great, Esla. I'm so glad you joined us. And Jana, good to see you here as well. So we often see ourselves how other people see us. And so he calls us out right at the beginning of it. And that is, that's not the way that we are, or that we should see ourselves. Because if we do that, then it's skewed by a whole bunch of different things. It's skewed from their motivations. John, so good to see you here. It's skewed by, you know, what they're looking for. In things, and there may be their own insecurities, and so it's important that you not see yourself how other people see you. Maybe you I don't want to say take that into account, but it's a factor as far as, you know, working with them, as far as communicating with them, that sort of thing. But you're looking for a more deep-seated understanding of yourself. Driving your value is self-determined as opposed to socially determined. The key to that, the key to kind of taking some control over that is, and many of you may have heard this before, he would decide within himself how all of this was going to affect him. This is talking about Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Can't recommend that book enough. Absolutely fantastic. Great perspective on things, and wonderful as far as you getting a little bit of a kick as far as valuing your life. Terrible situation that he found himself in, but a wonderful book, and that's what he's getting at here. Between what happened to him, or the stimulus, and his response to it was his freedom or power to choose that response. What happens to you, you have that choice. You have a moment on how you are going to react to that, or what your response is going to be. So it's a stimulus response thing. It's not automatic. It's not like somebody whacking your knee with a hammer. You have a choice to do that. Thanks, Katrina. And I'll mention that as well, a transition person. That's the key to so much of this, is not taking what just happens to us, but actually working with that, using it, taking control of that as far as how we respond to it. And that's going to be the key to so much of this. Sharon, good to see you here. It means that as human beings, we are responsible for our own lives. Now, here's the kicker to it. All right, our behavior is a function of our decisions, not our conditions. So what happens to us, we have a choice. And I know that's a difficult topic in today's day and age oftentimes, but we do ultimately have a choice. Doesn't mean that it's a fair choice. Doesn't mean that the situation that we find ourselves in is a fair situation. But we do have a choice in how we react. What that does is that gives you ownership over that. And that's an empowering place to move to, and where you can take some control and affect those situations that are happening to you, not just allow them to continue happening in the same way. Look at the word responsibility. He breaks it up. Response blank ability. All right, the ability to choose your response. Reactive people are often, talking about the difference between proactive and reactive, the reactive people are often affected by their physical environment. Using an example, if the weather is good, they feel good. If it isn't, it affects their attitude and their performance. Proactive people can carry their own weather with them. Reactive people are driven by feelings, by circumstances, by conditions, by their environment. Proactive people are driven by values that are carefully thought out, selected, and internalized. And that's what it kind of takes you through now is going through that process of selecting and internalizing your values. And that way you can take those values with you wherever you go, and that provides the foundation from which you can make changes. When you get a stimulus, you assess it and bounce it off of your values, basically, and that's what creates the response to that's in line with your values. Our basic nature is to act and not be acted on. And again, this was one that I didn't actually pull out ever before, but it's so powerful, the difference between sitting back and doing nothing and taking action. When you take action, that's one of the best things. When you're having a bad week, a bad day, do one thing that makes it better, even, no matter how small that is, just one thing. And that can turn everything around. And I like this. Our basic nature is to act. That action brings positivity. It brings hope. It brings control. All of those things are empowering. All of those things are positive, and all of those things breed more positive results with them. So I like that. I like that takeaway from it. Over the years, I have frequently counseled people who wanted better jobs to show more initiative. Those of you that tune into my live sessions, people that want to get promoted, what's the first advice that I give? Go to your boss and make sure that they know, hey, I'd be really interested in moving up within the company. You'd be surprised how many bosses aren't aware that you are interested in moving up. If you want something, ask for it. Take that initial action, and you'll be more apt to reap what you sow in that case. The next thing is talking about a proactive focus. Is you have two things. You have a circle of concern and you have a circle of influence. Now, those circles of concern, they may be what you read about in the news all the time. The latest natural disaster that is taking place, the latest political drama that's taking place. These are things that the news media is great at creating a concern for us and to have us internalize that, even though we have no influence on it. So proactive people put more of a focus on their circle of influence, what they can influence. It doesn't mean that they pay attention to a circle of concern. The question is how can they influence it? And what happens is when you have a circle of concern, you can't take action on that. Or, the action isn't completely obvious. Whereas if you focus on those things that you can influence, that breeds more action, that brings more control over your environment. So it may be that your circle of concern includes the environment, and so you make a donation to the Red Cross if you have a natural disaster that's going on. It can be that you may take an eye off of national politics and work more on local politics, where you have more influence over what is going on. Proactive people work within their circle of influence as much as possible, and what happens is what you focus on grows. So you can have two concentric circles here. He has it labeled out here. What happens is as you focus on your circle of influence on the inside, as you bring more focus, it expands. And so your influence expands to start covering more of what you're concerned about. When you find that you can influence certain things, then you find that when you're concerned about a natural disaster, I'll keep coming back to that because a hurricane hit the States here last week. Then you use that focus on influence to make that donation, to send blankets, to do whatever you can in that particular case. Not just be concerned and inactive about it, but be active about it. Proactive people focus their efforts in their circle of influence. They work on things that they can do something about. So they're thinking and they're working on things they can do something about. They're not thinking and working on things that they can't do anything about. Reactive people, on the other hand, focus their efforts on their circle of concern. They focus on the weaknesses of other people, the problems in the environment, and circumstances over which they have no control. And what happens is their circle of influence actually decreases because they're not putting a focus on it nearly as much. As long as we are working in our circle of concern, we empower the things within it to control us. So personally, this week I'm taking a break from news. I'm not looking at Yahoo, I'm not looking at CNN.com, Facebook, I'm not looking at Facebook actually, except for my personal page. So I'm monitoring that as far as trying to limit that circle of concern just a little bit. It just happened to coincide with me reading the 7 Habits here. But because I don't want that controlling my mindset. I don't want that occupying as much brain space. So every once in a while, I'm taking breaks from media just to kind of realign myself and kind of reset the brain. And then I'll get back into it so I have an idea of what's going on, but always looking to manage that as much as possible and take control over it. So three areas of control that we have. And so talking about it, and this can be indicative of whether it is an area of influence or whether it is an area of concern. And Sequoia, it's so good to see you here. First area of control is direct control. These are problems that are solved by working on our habits, things that we have direct control over, things in our family, things in our business. Indirect control are problems that are solved by changing our methods of influence. And so he's setting up kind of the rest of the book here. Direct control is habits 1 through 3. Indirect control is habits 4 through 6. Those are those ones where we're starting to talk about interdependence and working with other people. No control of problems involve taking the responsibility to change the line on the bottom on our face to smile. So in those cases where we have no control over something, the only thing that we can do, if you're going to take that stimulus response and take control of it, is to smile. Gain some perspective on it and move on from it. That's almost all you can do in those cases where you have no control. Anytime we think that the problem, and we're still talking being proactive, this first step is taking control. Anytime we think that the problem is out there, that thought is the problem. Okay, when we think, and the key to proactivity, taking that control, when we think that the problem is out there, that thought is the problem. I'll use the example again. Hurricane hits the other side of the United States, clear the other coast, all right? That problem is out there, right? That's a thought that doesn't breed an action. It can be, that's a problem, what can I do about it? Now that's something where I can say, I'm gonna go ahead and make a donation. Whatever it is that you can do in those cases, it moves it to a point where you can take action on it. So when you find that you're in those thoughts where it's somebody else's problem, that thought is the problem, is the root of the problem, and is the thing that you need to address. Find a way to actually take some responsibility over it. You'll take some action on it, and hopefully you'll maybe be able to make some improvements. And there's some tough situations out there as far as a work environment. About having a boss that doesn't particularly lead well, there are things that you can do to cover for those weaknesses, to make it better, to help that person see the light, to magnify their strengths, that sort of thing. What can you do in that situation? Not what somebody else can do. And that's where you can live a proactive lifestyle that breeds action and gives you more control over your environment. The proactive approach is to change from the inside out, to be different. And by being different, to affect positive change in what's out there. And I kind of reiterated that there. It's not what others do or even our own mistakes that hurts us the most. It is our response to those things. I'm going to say that again because it's huge. It is not what others do or even our own mistakes that hurts us the most. It is our response to those things. How we respond to a negative coworker. How we respond to a bad boss. How do we respond to troubles in our marriage? How we respond is the issue that is problematic for so many cases. It's certainly not all-encompassing as far as problems. Giving space. Katrina, and that's just it. Finding that way to take a breath. when somebody gives you bad news, when somebody insults you, when you have a tough situation. Not just having that immediate emotional knee-jerk response to something, but taking a breath, creating that space, as Katrina points out there. Thank you for pointing that out, Katrina. That's what's going to lead you to be more proactive and take more control. It is here, and this is a great way. So if you're still wondering, how do I make myself more proactive? How do I, create that space between stimulus and response? How do I do these sorts of things? Here's a quick way of doing it that anybody can acknowledge and start working through. It is here that we find two ways to put ourselves in control of our lives immediately. We can make a promise and keep it, or we can set a goal and work to achieve it. As we make and keep commitments, even small commitments, we begin to establish an inner integrity. The power to make and keep commitments to ourselves is the essence of developing the basic habits of effectiveness. So, if you want to start working on being more proactive, if you want to start working on taking more control of your life, two simple ways to start. Make a promise and keep it. Set a goal and start working towards it. When you do that, he talks about this later, you build an inner integrity. And from that point, you can actually start building some of these greater habits. All right. Second habit, moving on being proactive. And it's interesting. I don't think I really appreciated how much this chapter was not talking about being proactive in the typical way that we talk about it. I mean, it's getting at that, but it's getting a couple levels deeper than that into who we are and what helps us to actually be proactive. Before we can be proactive and get ahead of things in our workplace and in our life, we have to be able to take that control, to create that space between stimulus and response so that we're acting thoughtfully. And so I like that he dives much, much deeper. Habit 2 is beginning with the end in mind. And again, he takes this deeper than simply setting a goal. That's how we usually think of it. If you're beginning with the end in mind, you're setting a goal and you're working, say, backwards from there. Simple project management stuff that you might do. What he's actually talking about is who you are as a person. Not just whatever your specific goal is, but who is it that you want to be? What is the life that you want to have? Bigger. All right, so we went deeper, I want to say, with the being proactive chapter, and we go much higher than we go much higher as far as the second habit is concerned. I've got to attend. Thank you for touching on this. I needed to hear it again. Yeah, and Katrina, I actually went through a 7 Habits seminar about 10 years ago as well. Absolutely wonderful, fantastic, time well spent. So if anybody has a chance to go through it, it is absolutely worth the effort and the time to put in. You're definitely going to get more out of it than you put in. So in our personal lives, if we do not develop our own self-awareness and become responsible for the first creations, the first creation is the idea, all right? The idea of what we want to be, the idea of what the goal is. And the second creation is actually the formation of who we want to be, or the formation of the goal, the accomplishment of the goal. In our personal lives, if we do not develop our own self-awareness and become responsible for the first creations, we empower other people and circumstances outside of our circle of influence to shape much of our lives by default. Habit 1 says you are the creator. Habit 2 is this first creation. So if you don't do this, if you don't determine and get clear on who you are, what you want to be, then it becomes influenced by outside. And we see this all the time as far as materialism, let's say. All right? It may be that deep down inside you don't care at all what kind of car you drive. But if you don't pay attention to that, if you don't call that out, it's easier for you to buy the fancy car that you don't really want, need, or want to spend your money on, because the social aspects of things are saying you should buy that fantastic brand new car. Just a simple example of that. Management is a bottom line focus. How can I best accomplish certain things? Leadership deals with the top line. What are the things I want to accomplish? And they use the old Peter Drucker quote, management is efficiency in climbing the ladder of success. Leadership determines whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. And so he's calling this out because it's a leadership trait. So talking about beginning with the end in mind, the leader is the one who often sets the end goal, who we are. All right, that's making sure that the ladder is leaning in the right place, and then you manage it. That's the secondary thing. So don't worry about managing first. Worry about going in the right direction first and foremost. And good. Whatever is at the center of your life, talking about beginning with the end in mind, whatever is at the center of our life will be the source of our security, our guidance, our wisdom, and our power. And so he starts diving kind of deep here a little bit as far as what is the center of your life. Charles, good to see you here. Is it God? Is it religion? Is it money? Is it family? Family is, the center of many people's lives. Is it yourself? Is it some other purpose? What is the center of your life? Because whatever the center of your life is where all of that security, guidance, wisdom, and power is going to come from. And just kind of talking through things. You can be spouse-centered. He goes through a big, long list of ways. And so you go through this list as far as the book is concerned. If you haven't picked up the book, it is always my number one recommendation. If you haven't read it, read it. If you haven't read it in the last 3 to 5 years, read it again. It's worthwhile. But he goes through these centers: money-centered, work-centered, possession-centered, pleasure-centered, friend-centered, enemy-centered, church-centered, self-centered. All of these things, and he kind of lays out what effect that has on wisdom, on guidance, on your power, how those things affect that. And in many cases, people are a combination of these centers. And so you can take a look at that, but calling that out allows you to understand where you're coming from, whether you need to maybe make an adjustment and focus on a different area that's going to get different results. The ideal, of course, is to create one clear center from which you consistently derive a high degree of security, guidance, wisdom, and power, empowering your proactivity and giving you congruency and harmony to every part of your life. So, even if it has to be an amalgamation of a few different ones, maybe it is career-centered and family-centered, and those are the two things that you're focused on. Okay, fine. But get clear on that, because that's where you're going to derive your security and your power and your guidance from. You're going to get guidance from how you're going to need to deal with family and how you want to be as a family person, how you want to be as an employee. That's going to set the direction of where the end is. And that if you get clear on that, then you can start making decisions that align with that end goal that you're after. You'll reach your goal quicker, and you'll do it in a happier frame of mind as well. Continuing to move on here. So nope, I'm going to skip that. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to keep moving on because I know that we are, there is a lot to cover here. One of the biggest takeaways, and I'm actually including this, I'm speaking at a convention here in Las Vegas on workplace culture. And one of the things that I took away from this is without involvement, there is no commitment. He calls this out on page 143 in my copy of the book. Without involvement, there's no commitment. And I talk about this all the time. Your employees have the answers to most every problem that you have. Bring them into the process. Change management. Some of the oldest change management studies that were done showed that the more involvement people had in the change, the more they were brought into the planning process, the more they were brought into each step along the way, the better and the more traction that change had. The better effect it had, the higher the performance was after it was put into effect, all of those things. So without involvement, there is no commitment. Anything that's important, anything that you're working on in your work life, in your family life, bring those people that are affected by it into that process. The more involvement they have, the more commitment they're going to have, and that makes everything much, much easier. But it was actually a call out that I'm going to have, because one of those things with workplace culture that I'll be talking about on Monday is that you want to bring the people into the formation of the culture. You want to have them have a big stake, preferably a big stake, in what's going on and how the culture is formed and what it impacts. Because it informs on your decision, and it makes it easier for that culture to actually take root and to flower. So just a nice little takeaway there. I always like this, and you may have heard this before, but the successful person has the habit of doing the things failures don't like to do. And we've all heard that, putting in the work, putting in the patience, not looking for the quick fix that's not going to be durable over time, but putting putting in the work to build a foundation that's lasting, that you can continue to build off of and build higher from than that quick and dirty foundation. I also like this, a burning yes inside that makes it possible to say no to other things. We are all overburdened with things that we need to do, things we need to accomplish. Our to-do lists are crazy and they are never ending. But it makes it easier to say no to something when you've gotten clear on what that yes is. When you have the end in mind, and we're moving into, and I'm sorry, we're transitioning into the third habit, which is putting first things first. When you have that burning desire, you began with the end in mind, that clear picture on what you want to be, who you want to be, what you want to accomplish. When you have that to look to and say, yes, I want that, it's easier to say no to things that move you away from that. And so that's one of the keys to putting first things first. To being able to say no to something is to have a really powerful yes to something else. So something that you don't want to take time away from and that you want to put the effort towards delegating. He goes through the time management matrix, and the key here is that you want to protect the important from the urgent. So simple matrix, 4 squares on here, importance, urgency. And so what happens for most of us is we work in quadrant number 1, where everything is important and urgent. And this is, I talk about this in my own time management seminars, is how to work within that and the importance of staying in those top 2 tiers where you're working on those things that are important and urgent, or important and not urgent. Stephen Covey takes this a different way. And he says you don't want to work on the important and the urgent, because what happens is if all of your focus is there, what happens is that box takes up a larger and larger portion of the grid. And all of a sudden you find that 90% of your time you're running around putting out fires that are important and urgent. What you want to do is you want to shift some of that focus and work on those things that are important and not urgent. And so this is just, it depends on what it is that you're dealing with here a little bit. And so I take the philosophy that it's important and urgent, those things that you want to work on, those things that really move the needle. And importance puts a little bit of extra urgency behind something. Stephen Covey's taken the idea that, the urgent isn't necessarily important in and of itself. It becomes that way over time. And so you want to put a subset of your time into the second quadrant. Yes, Kim, it's a balancing act. And that's just it. Take some of your time and move it over to those things that are important and not necessarily urgent, but that will affect your ability to get into those quadrant 1, important and urgency. It's getting ahead of things. That's the best way to describe it. So the more time and the more focus you put into that quadrant where you're dealing with important things that are going to get ahead of problems perhaps that come up. That's another one that crops up all the time. You have to be able to put in the time on the things that you realize are going to reap a benefit down the road. You can ignore this for a while, but eventually it's going to become this huge problem. Whereas if you put a little bit of time into it now, you would have saved yourself a bunch of time with dealing with the problem. And so look for those opportunities, call them those 80-20 principles, where you can put that 20% of effort but reap 80% of the gain. Look for those opportunities that surround your important items. But that's putting first things first, is working on those things that give you the maximum amount of benefit for the time that you put in and that end up saving you time down the road. Planning, as you point out, Katrina, is a huge part of that. And he'll get into this with the Franklin Covey planner, which I've used and I've enjoyed before. Urgent matters are usually visible. We react to urgent matters. All right, and I think that's where he's drawing that break in the matrix, is that we react to urgent matters. We are proactive in regards to non-urgent matters. And so if you want to be more proactive, you want to work on those non-urgent things. As long as you focus on quadrant 1, that urgent and important stuff, it keeps getting bigger and bigger until it completely dominates you. He calls out, I kind of called out already, quadrant 2. Effective people, and I really, really like this particular quote. Effective people are not problem-minded. They are opportunity-minded. Again, I'm going to say that. Effective people are not solving problems. Effective people are working on opportunities. And that's where you reap that outsized benefit down the road. The more you focus on those opportunities, that's what's going to make you more effective in leadership. Most people say that their main fault, I like this because I ran right into this as I was reading through it. Most people say that their main fault is a lack of discipline. As he's going through the questions, that's what I came to. I'm like, no, I lack the discipline to follow through on what my plan is. The issue though is deeper. I believe that's not the case. The basic problem is that their priorities have not become deeply planted in their hearts and minds. And so you may feel, this is a really good takeaway for everybody who's watching out there. If you feel like you're lacking discipline, that you know exactly what it is that you're looking to accomplish, what your priority is, and you just lack the discipline, it isn't that you lack the discipline. It's that you lack the strong enough why behind that priority. You haven't visualized it. You haven't gotten it into your marrow. You haven't tied it to your inner being and to larger goals that you want to accomplish. What you're looking for is you're looking to create a strong yes behind that priority. It's easy to say no to things that, whatever. But if you have a strong yes, a strong reason for something, then you will have the discipline. The discipline flows from that motivation is what I think he's really getting at here. But this was an eye-opener for me because as he's going through kind of the scenario, I'm like, no, it's discipline. That's what my issue is. I know what my priorities are. I just lack the discipline to carry forward with those. I suffer from that just as much as anybody else does out there. But really what it is I need to get back in touch with my priorities and why are they a priority. And if I can get a strong enough why, then it becomes very easy to follow along with that. It isn't a discipline issue, it's a motivation issue, quite frankly. Now he does get into, and he touches on the Franklin Covey planner. I had one ages ago, one of those things that I kind of stepped away from. But it is, and I have to say, it's a wonderful way of planning things. It's a wonderful way of aligning your priorities with who you are, what your roles are. You're a husband, you're a wife, you're a mother, you're a father, you're an employee, you're a boss, you're a friend. All of these different roles, and it calls out those roles, and then what your goals are for the week in working on those, and then your schedule. So you take your priorities. That old principle. Take your priorities. What is a priority to you? I tell people to do this with their to-do list. Take the top 3 things on your to-do list and I want you to shove them into your calendar. I want you to schedule a meeting with yourself for 2 hours on Monday from 10 o'clock to noon to work on your top priority. Or maybe it's, whenever you have time. But take your priorities and put them in your calendar. Make them a priority. Put your first things first to tie into the name of this particular habit that he's working on. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it, is calling out what your roles are, assigning priorities to those roles, and then putting those roles into your calendar. Too many things, and then don't finish them as quickly. And so the motivation, Kim, there, the issue is you need to get in touch with what is your biggest priority. What is, he'll talk about this in here, and I encourage you to read the book. You'll work through some exercises there to help you with that. But get in touch with the character and on a larger scale, what you want to be and what you want to accomplish. And then those priorities become a little bit cleaner. So it isn't that you start too many things, it's that you get in touch with what you really need to be working on first and foremost. So put the first things first. And maybe it's that you're just overcommitting yourself. That can be the other thing. And in that case, start with half. You can always fill those in later. I tell people all the time to schedule emergencies. You don't know what's going to go wrong in your job, but gosh darn it, something seems to go wrong every day. So schedule an hour from 10:30 to 11:30 in the morning and from 3:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon to handle those particular emergencies. Now, if nothing comes up, then great. You've got a laundry list of things that you can do and that you can shove into that hour of free time, but you're at least setting that aside so that you're not overcommitting yourself. So that's my big thing as far as overcommitting, is start with half, and then you'll find that if you have the time, you're going to go ahead and be able to put something in there relatively easily. Effectively delegating and calling it out here, especially for leaders here, so such a key as far as time management is concerned and as far as employee development is concerned, is effective delegating to others is perhaps the single most powerful high leverage activity there is. I'm going to say this again because The big issue with delegating in your work is I don't have time to delegate. It's going to take me 2 hours to teach this person how to do this report. It just takes me 30 minutes to do it myself. All right. The effectively delegating to others is perhaps the single most powerful high leverage activity there is. The reason is that report, if it takes you 2 hours to teach somebody to do it, but a half an hour to do it, after 4 times doing it, you are now gaining time. Over the course of a year, let's say it was a monthly report. Over the year, you've now just gotten 3 times the value out of that 2 hours because you saved yourself, okay, never mind, it took 2 hours. Well, yeah, you saved yourself 3 hours of time putting it together. Sorry, I'm doing the math on that completely wrong, but you save yourself time down the road. All right, so make the time to delegate because it's something that reaps those benefits. It reaps compounding interest as far as that time that you invest in that activity. And this is another one that I don't know why I hadn't picked up on before, but we talk about motivation and talk about motivating our team members. Trust is the highest form of human motivation. It brings out the very best in people, but it takes time and patience. So investing in trust with your team, following through on what you say, supporting them in the right ways, offering support to them. When they trust you, when they trust the mission, they're going to buy into things quicker, and they're going to be more apt to work towards those things. And so it was just interesting that trust is something we don't usually think of as a motivating factor or something that works with motivation, but you can see it as kind of a founding principle of motivation. So we're moving now into, we worked through the first 3 habits, all right? Being proactive, all right? Beginning with the end in mind and then putting first things first. That is the personal victory, as he calls it. That's getting your house in order, basically. Once you have your house in order, then you can start working on interdependence and working with other people. So get the personal victory first, as he calls it out, and then you start working on principles of interdependence or working with others and getting more out of other people and yourself in the process. The most important ingredient we put into any relationship is not what we say or what we do, but what we are. So back to one of the first things that I called out. We talk all the time. It's not what you say, it's what you do. No. Another foundation beyond that is who you are, because who you are creates what you do and what you say. And so I really like calling that out. But that's what matters as far as your relationships, as far as working with other individuals. And that's why it's important to put in the time, put in the effort to clarify who you are, why you do what you do, what the end goal is for what you're doing, getting your house in order, because who you are says more than what you do and what you say, obviously, as well. Next aspect of this is, so talking about relationships, and he uses the emotional bank. And I've seen this used in marriage counseling before too, where you have debits and credits to a bank account of emotions, shall we say. And so going along with that, there's 6 major deposits that he calls out as far as the emotional bank account for relationships. And I just wanted to call these out because these are really good. Understanding the individual is the first of 6 major deposits. Getting to know somebody is a wonderful way to showing that you value the relationship. If you don't understand the person that you're dealing with, I might ask why you want a relationship with them at all. So understanding the person, investing in them, that's a great way of making a deposit into the emotional bank account of a relationship. And this goes employees and personal life. So it's business, or it's personal and it's professional. And that's one of the powerful aspects of this particular book, is that it has that impact on your personal and your professional life. So it's kind of a double whammy as far as the time spent reading it. Second thing, and it is attending to the little things, the little kindnesses, the little courtesies. I've seen this used before. It's finding the universe in a grain of sand. And so one of those management principles is that occasionally you find something small. It might be that the printer ran out of paper. So instead of bringing over 1 box, you bring over 3 boxes, and you organize the paper in the cupboard or something. You find the universe in a grain of sand. You dive deep on things. But the little things is another way of tackling this. The simple kindness, the simple way of noticing things. That's good. 3, the third aspect, the third great deposit in a relationship is keeping commitments. I would say that's kind of almost a promise. But if you say you're going to do something, then do it. And if you can't do it, so this happens a lot in business, where you say you're going to do something, then for whatever reason, you can't get it done. You need to go to that person, volunteer to go to that person. Don't wait for them to come to you, and explain why you couldn't do what you promised to do. When you do that, when you have a strong why behind it that they can understand, then they forgive you. And that's in keeping with that commitment. 4, so important, clarify the expectations. If you want to, have a strong relationship with somebody, you need to acknowledge and clarify those expectations on what you expect from them from work. All right, what you might expect as far as communication schedule, if it's your personal life, how often you expect to communicate, clarify those things. Showing personal integrity. And the way that he calls this out is having personal integrity really comes to the forefront when you are loyal to those who are not present. And so when we talk gossip in the office, gossiping about somebody behind their back to somebody else just proves to that other person that you are willing to gossip behind their back about them. And so show that personal integrity of being loyal to people who aren't present. The 6th thing is to apologize sincerely when you make a withdrawal. And going along, so the first habit of getting to know somebody, I think, is the most powerful deposit. Spending that time that you value them enough to understand who they are. I think the second most valuable, and he doesn't rank these, and you probably shouldn't, but second big one is admitting when you make a mistake. When you screw something up, when you don't meet those expectations, when you aren't accountable for your own integrity, then you want to step up and admit the mistake. When you admit the mistake, you open it up for forgiveness. If you never admit the mistake, then it's hard for you to be forgiven because you haven't taken that initial step. And so those are just 6 ways of deepening relationships and moving to a foundation of interdependence, because getting the most out of other individuals almost requires all of these things and for you to have a strong relationships. The other thing is looking at problems and looking at bad situations. When parents, and this again is that parenting model, it's different than work, but absolutely applies. When parents see their children's problems as opportunities to build the relationship instead of as a negative, burdensome irritation, it totally changes the nature of the parent-child relationship. You see this, and it's called out in the hospitality industry, but any customer service industry, and it's the customer service paradox. And that is, when you make a mistake, when you screw up somebody's customer service, if you come back to that and you fix the mistake, you acknowledge the mistake, you fix the mistake, and you make it right, oftentimes those people that had a service failure are more loyal and more satisfied with their experience than those people whose service went off without a hitch. And so looking at problems as opportunities to deepen a relationship is a great way to do it, because you might still have a problem as far as work is concerned, as far as report production is concerned, but you have the ability to work with somebody else and to deepen that relationship because of that crisis. And you see this happen all the time around crises that happen in the workplace where everybody has to come together. Those are opportunities to deepen relationships. When you see problems as opportunities, then you lean into those problems, and it's easier to be more proactive as well. So moving on to habit 4, and it's the first habit of the public victory, not the personal victory, and that is thinking win-win. And he calls out a scenario in here where salespeople aren't collaborating. And so he asks the CEO, what is the reward for not cooperating? And the CEO responds, there's no reward for not cooperating. The rewards are much greater if they do cooperate. And so I called this out because I wanted to bring up, when we see problems of behavior in the workplace or in our personal lives, in our family life, the question you need to ask yourself is, what is the reward for that particular behavior? Why are people doing that particular behavior? Why are they disobeying you? Why are they not following procedures? It may be that your children are disobeying you because they want more independence. They're fighting for that responsibility. Address that and you address the problem. People aren't following the procedures because they want things to be easier. So can you simplify them? What's that? So the question is when they're doing bad behavior or when there's things wrong, what can you learn from that? What's the underlying principle behind that? And that's kind of why I just wanted to call that particular aspect out of seeking the win-win. Maturity, and talking about character again. So again, driving deep with that for that win-win. Win-win is something that requires maturity, as he calls out, and that is the balance between courage and consideration. So to seek the win-win means to not take the easy route. The easy route is to assert your authority over somebody and get a win-lose situation. Or it is something that is out of weakness, and it's taking a lose-win sort of situation where you're just kind of giving it up. You're being subservient to somebody else. It takes courage to step into those things, and obviously it takes conscientiousness, and that you have to think things through and get creative as far as the solution. When a boss becomes, and still talking win-win here, big chapter in here. When a boss becomes the first assistant to each of his subordinates, he can greatly increase his span of control. And I love that. The principle of giving ownership over tasks, responsibility over their production, their work, their effectiveness over to them, and telling them that you will be their first assistant. Hey, if you have issues, if you need help, then come to me. Otherwise, I'm giving you responsibility over this to meet the expectations and the goals that we have. And if you need help with it, then you let me know. But that's a great frame of reference. That's the servant leadership sort of idea behind management. But it allows you to push out that responsibility to as many people as possible. Not pushing it as far away from you as possible, but to as many people. And with more people comes more energy and more focus that can be brought to bear on those things. And then you are in that supporting role. I just really like that as a call out. So often the problem is in the system, not the people. If you put good people in bad systems, you get bad results. Maybe you've experienced that with a job, where you stepped into a job and it didn't work out because the system was in place. Makes you want everyone to be successful, no matter your successes. Fantastic, great. Thank you for putting that in there, Katrina, and that's a great point. The essence of principled negotiation is to separate the person from the problem. We can get competitive with a person. We don't necessarily get competitive as much with a problem. And so it's easier if you put that focus on the problem, not the person. To focus on interests and not on positions. To invent options for mutual gain, and to insist on objective criteria. And so, Katrina kind of nailed it down there, and Stephen Covey calls it out a little bit more. It's not that you're looking necessarily even for win-win. He takes it a step further in the later chapter and says, it's win-win or it's no deal. Either we both win in this negotiation or in this situation, or we're not going to do it at all. Because we don't want to waste our efforts on something where somebody's going to take an emotional credit from the check, the emotional bank account, or somebody is going to take a hit for this. We're looking for those win-wins. And if you focus on the problem, if you focus on the intention, if you focus on the other individual and what they want, you understand things better, and you're more likely to get creative with that. There's a win-win that's out there in almost every situation. You just have to look for it, and you have to be committed to it. Not just you, but the other party as well. That's such a key. Fifth habit is seek first to be understood, I keep doing that. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I almost think this should come first before thinking win-win. But thinking win-win puts you in the right frame of mind as far as understanding other individuals. You don't have much confidence in someone who doesn't diagnose before he or she prescribes. And there's a whole bunch of examples that he used as far as seeking first to understand, then to be understood. And so the doctor example, you wouldn't go see a doctor that is seeking to be understood, not to understand you. You want them to understand you first, understand your symptoms, understand your problems, and then to be understood as far as what the diagnosis is. The first thing, or what the prescription is, the first thing is to diagnose, then you prescribe. And too many times people completely skip over that. Too many times people are in discussions and they are, conversing to respond, not to actually understand what the other person is saying. Only 10% of our communication is represented by the words we say. Only 10% is represented by the words we say. Another 30% is represented by the sounds, the tone of voice that we use. and 60% by our body language. Empathic listening is so powerful because it gives you accurate data to work with. Talking about instead of projecting your own autobiography and assuming thoughts, feelings, motives, and interpretations, you're dealing with the reality inside another person's head. The talking and listening more. See, next to me. Career and mostly, yes, absolutely, Katrina. What he talks about a lot of times here is people don't just listen to respond. They listen autobiographically. So they listen with their own experiences in their mind. And so what you want to do, and this is what I'm getting to right now, Katrina, what you want to do is take your own autobiography out of it. Well, you know, it happens a lot where somebody explains a situation, you say, you know what, I had a situation that happened to me just like that. It was such and such. That doesn't add no value to the conversation. All right? You want to understand the other person, what they're feeling, and realize that they are different than you. And that's what allows you to kind of open up some possibilities in how to respond and how to deal with them a little bit more. But the better you listen, the more information you have, and with more information comes a better resolution, a better decision, a better path moving forward. So get that information first and foremost. For those of you that have issues as far as negotiating conflict, one of the first things to do is to seek to understand. Because if you understand, if you ask them questions about their point of view, you get more information to find out, A, whether they're right in the conflict or not, but you also get to the underlying things that support their argument, and then you attack those as far as conflict is concerned. That gives you a better, it's almost like a sneak around. People are very defensive up front, but if you understand their positions and the foundations of those decisions, you can ask questions about that undermine those, and that gets them over to your point of view, hopefully the correct point of view. MP, good to see you here, and Luis, good to see you here as well. This is one of these things that you miss, and so many times I've read, this is the third time I've read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and I pull something every time, and I've been shocked at some of the main key, short, just sweet takeaways from it. This is one of the greatest insights in the field of human motivation. Satisfied needs do not motivate. So he's talking about people's wanting to be understood and people wanting you to understand their position on things. This is one of the greatest insights in the field of human motivation. Satisfied needs do not motivate. So if you're trying to motivate people, well, then use the example. Money is something we always try to motivate with. Well, if you have a super rich person, money isn't a motivator. And so satisfied needs don't motivate. If people already have all the acclaim that they want, as far as, they're your superstar employee, they're always winning the awards, those awards lose their impact down the road. Satisfied needs don't motivate. Just a wonderful little takeaway. So still talking about seeking to understand, not to be understood. If you don't have the confidence in the diagnosis, you won't have confidence in the prescription. And that's one of the powerful things as far as coming up with solutions. When you're fighting for your particular solution, when you understand the issues, when you show that you understand what the problems are, what their roots are, then people are going to buy into your solution for those. The best way to motivate people, MP, is to bring them into the discussion. To a slight aside from this book, but bringing people into the discussion and oh man, I'm looking for that call out that I had. But people that are involved in something will be more committed to it. That's it. That's kind of the takeaway. So involve people in decisions, involve people in how you're going to find solutions, and they're going to be more invested in the solution, and that's going to provide the natural motivation moving forward. And moving on here. Affirming your motive, so seeking first to understand. Also part of that is telling people why you're looking to do something, what the goal is a huge part of why is it that you are doing what you're doing. Hey, I'm here because I want to help. I want to do this. Affirming who you are and giving them insight into you can be a deposit as well. It isn't just finding insight from them. So that's, let me make, there we go, slight adjustment there. Empathic listening takes time. And I love this takeaway because we never have enough time to listen. We're always running to a meeting. We can't invest the minute, 2 minutes to listen to somebody. Empathic listening takes time, but it doesn't take anywhere near as much time as it takes to back up and correct misunderstandings. Listening is one of those time benefits that you're going to be able to reap. You get more information, you make better decisions. If you make better decisions, then you don't have to go back and fix as many things. Such a key. Knowing how to be understood. So we've talked about seeking to understand. Sonola, good to see you here. We've talked about seeking to understand. That's the key. The second aspect of this is to seek to be understood. And this actually came up in another book we were reading, and it was Milton Friedman was the economist, and it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president going through the Great Depression. And whether this was right or wrong, Milton Friedman could not convince Franklin Delano Roosevelt to take a particular action with the economy. And because of that action, the Great Depression lasted twice as long as it needed to. And so all of Milton Friedman, great economist, all of his knowledge was useless because he couldn't convince the other person to take action on that knowledge. All right, so you seek to understand. That's great. You get a ton of information. You get the correct solution to a particular thing. Then you need to seek to be understood. That's just as important of a point. Having all of that knowledge is useless if you don't actually put it into place. All right. One of the things that is problematic with this, and how, again, Stephen Covey dives deeper into the particular situation, is that when we give presentations, all right, notice the sequence, all right? As far as establishing credibility, there's a sequence to it. There's ethos, there's your character, there's relationships, and then there's logic, all right? So notice the sequence, all right? It's character, most important, and then your relationships, and then your logic, all right? So it goes from that foundation. The problem is that when you see presentations being made, when you have people convincing you to their point of view, they're not addressing character. They're not addressing the relationship at all. They haven't sought to be understood or show that they understand those two aspects. Instead, they go straight to logic, which is actually the weakest, not the weakest, but the tip of the pyramid. They're missing all of that foundation stuff. And so when you go through the seek to understand parts, you're establishing character, you're establishing the relationship, and then you can talk through logic. If you haven't gone through that before, it makes it difficult for logic to flower. One of the main things here, and again, a great call it is, being influenceable is the key to influencing others. Having all of those discussions with individuals where you're talking through ideas doesn't matter if it's always your idea that you end up going with. You need to be influenceable. And that means that you are seeking, part of that seeking to understand is understanding where you may be wrong. When you have those conflicts and you're asking questions about people's motivations and their underlying principles and their underlying assumptions, you're also looking not just for things that you can poke holes in and win your side of the argument, you're also looking to reaffirm that, you know what, they might be right. And if they're right, then hey, the conflict is over and you understand them better. Too many times we're not trying to convey that, we're just defending our point of view. So show that you are influenceable and you will have more influence over other individuals. Thanks, Kimberly. Glad you liked that part. The other aspect of this is how do you define effective? And he goes through an example where he was he thought he was effectively presenting his point of view to his boss. And so, well, did you go through? Yes, I went through a presentation and all of that. No, I've done it effectively. And he just won't come around. The effectiveness means that it worked. That is the essence of being effective. And so if you think that you've done something effectively, you know what? I have, put forward my position effectively. No, you haven't if it didn't work, if you didn't come to some resolution on it. And it may be that you're putting forth your point of view without listening to the possibility that you're wrong on the other side. But it was just an interesting call out that to be effective, it has to work. That is the essence of effectiveness. The more deeply you understand other people, the more you will appreciate them, the more reverent you will feel about them, and the easier it'll be for that to be reciprocated. All right? The more deeply you understand, the more you appreciate, the more reverent you'll feel about them, and the easier that will be to be reciprocated to you. So moving along into the sixth habit. So talking about the last part of the interdependence or the public victory is synergizing. So you've looked for the win-win. You've sought to understand, not be understood. Now it's time to put those things into action and synergize. This is where you take 1 + 1 and it equals 2.5. 1 + 1 = 4. That sort of thing, where the two of you coming together, you working with other people, creates outsized results over what would happen if it was done individually. When you communicate synergistically, talking about synergistic communication, you are simply opening your mind and heart and expressions to new possibilities, new alternatives, and new options. All right? You're opening yourself up. When we're talking about synergistic communication, you are opening yourself up to other ideas, the ideas of another person. This is where the two of you become better, because you have great ideas and the other person has great ideas. If you can put just those great ideas together and not be working on the non-great ideas, then you're both better for it. And so you open yourself up to new ideas and expressions, and that creates possibilities and alternatives for you. Unusually creative situation. Yes, look to those where, so when you had those synergistic activities, look to those as a guide. Oftentimes it happens in a period of crisis for whatever reason, where people came together, brainstormed ideas, or worked together more effectively than they usually work together. But look to those and see if you can create that same sort of mindset. What went into that? Okay, well, we brought everybody together. We had something that we identified the importance of what it was working on. You dissect those things where you were successful, and that can help lead you to some of the ways to do this in a regular day-to-day business. Buddhism, and I had heard this before, Buddhism calls this the middle way. Middle, in this sense, does not mean a compromise, and that's how most people think of it. All right, you think about that compromise, doing something that's right in the middle. It actually means higher, like the apex of a triangle. So you're looking for that opportunity that is higher, above what the two of you might be talking about. And by coming together and discussing ideas, you bounce those ideas off of each other, and it's almost like bouncing a ball and having it go up as it bounces back and forth between you. Valuing the differences is the essence of synergy. The mental, the emotional, the psychological differences between people, and the key to valuing those differences is to realize that all people see the world not as it is, but as they are. So there's an example, one of those pictures, he uses it right at the beginning, where it can be seen in two different ways. Depending on how you look at it, you could see a young woman, or you could see a very old hag. And so he uses that as an example where both people are right. That picture is there. It's just done in two different ways at the same time. And so it isn't that one person is right or wrong, it's that you have to understand the differences between the two. If two people have the same opinion, I love this, if two people have the same opinion, one of those opinions is unnecessary. And being thrilled when somebody has a different take on something, because that's an opportunity for you then to learn something. The opportunity to perhaps be exposed to a better way of doing things. And so you want to seek out people that have differences, that have different opinions from you, because that's where you're going to find the learning. That's where you're going to find the opportunities for you to grow, to clarify certain opinions on things. And hopefully, if the conversation goes well, they're getting the same thing. Those differences create the opportunities for growth. When you have the similar backgrounds, when you have similar opinions on things, there's no growth. And that's the essence of what he's talking about here with synergies. The more genuine the involvement, so talking about natural synergies and making it more natural thing. The more genuine the involvement, the more sincere and sustained the participation in analyzing and solving the problems, the greater the release of everyone's creativity and of their commitment to what they create. So it's important when you're looking for these synergies, when you're looking for this communication, that it's done in the right way, that it's done from a place of personal respect, all right? That it's done with an eye towards what the goal is, beginning with the end in mind. What are we looking? We're looking to hopefully, share ideas, come up with some new ideas. The essence of brainstorming sessions is to bounce those ideas off and come up with some possibilities. But It's genuine involvement, sincere and sustained participation, taking that little extra time with it. That's where you recognize the value of the activity that you're going forward with. When someone disagrees with you, you can say, good. You see it differently. That's how you know that you've got the synergistic aspect of the 7 habits together right. The last one is sharpening the saw, 7th habit. And this is different than how you might take it. It might be sharpening the saw, might be going through the 6 habits that you'd gone through before again, and doing it better this particular time. And I think that's absolutely valuable. But what he's focusing on more here is things outside of the 6 habits that you've already gone through. Making sure to refresh and renew your physical, social, spiritual, and mental aspects. All right, the single most powerful investment that we can ever make in life is investment in ourselves. So reading books like we're doing now, spending time meditating or going to church, whatever it is from a spiritual aspect. Time in nature is another one. Physical aspects, getting the exercise. Social, being able to spend time socially with friends. Investing in that is important to keeping health and bringing energy to your working through all of the other habits that are talked about here. I just called this out for myself actually almost, but almost all of the benefits of exercise come at the very end. He's talking to an exercise physiologist. So almost all of the benefits of exercise, for those of you hitting the gym wanting to lift weights, do some more cardio, almost all of the benefits come in at the end, the last 5 minutes that you're running, the last 1 or 2 reps that you do. That's where most of the benefits come in physiologically. So just talking about the physical aspect of things. And then he also had a quote in here, oh good, it's raining. I get to develop my willpower as well as my body. So taking those outside influences and looking for opportunities. A problem is an opportunity. So you want to go jogging and it's raining outside. Well, you know what? Now that's an opportunity to work on your willpower, not just your physical benefits. I'm glad that, thank you, Katrina, I appreciate that. Probably the greatest benefit you will experience from exercising will be the development of your habit 1 muscles of proactivity. Your paradigm for your success, yourself, your self-esteem, your self-confidence, and your integrity will be profoundly affected. So much of this works together, and this gets back to if you want to work on being proactive. All right, you make a promise and you set a goal. And so something like working on your physical body and going to the gym 3 times a week. That is something where you're keeping a promise to yourself. You're working towards a goal. And what that does is that builds integrity. And it makes it easier for you to follow through on other things. It's a habit, something that's ingrained in part of your character. And so starting with something simple like that actually has outside benefits in other areas. The other thing is pushing it out to other individuals. So he's talking the social elements, but this is again moving a level higher. And it's what I hope is in each of your minds who's watching this now, and that is, what if you were a positive scripter, an affirmer of other people? When they're being directed by the social mirror to take the lower path, you inspire them towards a higher path because you believe in them. So it isn't just what you get out of a social interaction, it's what you give to a social interaction. What do we reflect to others about themselves? And how much does that reflection influence their life, being an example to other people? Goethe taught, and this is I think my last thought here, and it's a great one. Goethe taught that treat a man as he is, and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he will become as he can and should be. So if you want somebody to be more responsible, give them some responsibility. If you want somebody to gain a skill, give them that skill. Give them responsibility over that particular skill. So think the best of people, and they often rise to the occasion. That which we persist in doing becomes easier. Not that the nature of the task has changed, but our ability to do has increased. So talking about the main points of habits, and that is when you do it once, it becomes easier to do it again. When you meet a challenge, it's easier to take that challenge on a second time. And so That's the benefit of creating those habits, is that it becomes a way of life, and things that were once difficult that you didn't look forward to. This happens with public speaking or test taking or something along those lines. You may not have liked doing it initially. It may have been something that was nerve-wracking to you, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And so focus on that, and these things become habits and they become very easy. So again, for those that tuned in late, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's always my #1 book recommendation. But the thing is most everybody's already read it, and that's fine. Read it again, because you will always take something else from it. You are at a different stage of your life. Oftentimes people that I talk to about that haven't read it for 15 or 20 years. All right, well, your whole life has changed. What you're going to bring to it is absolutely crazy different than what you took away from it the first time. And so take a look at some of these great books, because they have that lasting integrity and that lasting durability. Katrina, appreciate all of your thoughts here on this particular session. I encourage you to look at my other book discussions, and next week we'll be talking about Crucial Conversations, noon Pacific Standard Time. I hope to see you here. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.